Also, Ghana National Association of Cocoa Farmers welcome cost-cutting decision by Cocoa Board management, but they want the reduction to be steeper.
We will also take you to the Jaman North District Assembly, where over 9,500 bears have been distributed to 245 residents and governments in Kokonketin project. It's News Central live on TV3. I'm Kemeni Amano.
And I am Mawina Egbeta. The bulletin starts right now. Now, a deadly militant attack on Ghanaian tomato traders in northern Burkina Faso has exposed the dangerous reality behind Ghana's tomato supply chain. Heavy reliance on cross-border imports meets a fast-spreading insurgency, with local production meeting only a fraction of national demand and hundreds of import shipments recorded each year. Many traders still travel through high-risk Burkina Faso routes. The latest killing of 7 Ghanaians in Titao shows how food security, regional trade and terrorism are now directly colliding, placing Ghanaian market actors on the front line of a widening Sahel conflict. Ghana produces about 380,000 metric tons of fresh tomatoes every year, yet national demand peaks at some 1.3 million metric tons. This leaves a supply gap of roughly 900,000 metric tons that is filled through imports and cross-border trade, especially from Burkina Faso. Local supply covers only about 30 to 35% of demand, while imports of both fresh tomatoes and paste continue to rise. Over 1,300 fresh tomato import shipments were recorded in as recent as last 12-month period. Industry estimates puts the annual economic loss from tomato imports dependence at some 5.7 billion cedis. But let's seek to paint the picture for you in exploring the dangers associated with this high-risk travel by these tomato traders to make the commodity readily available to you and I at the markets. And we'll seek to, amongst many other things, explain bits and pieces of what I've been telling you already, the deficit in which we have as a country and reason why we're having to travel or make this 920-plus kilometer journey to get to Burkina Faso, not Cote d'Ivoire, to be able to bring us these tomato shipments into the country. And so here's what I was talking to you about, that for every year, Ghana as a country are having to meet a demand of 1.3 million metric tons in terms of tomato supply. As a country, we're able to reach just some 35% of this import. But interestingly, while we're meeting this 35% in terms of domestic production, we consistently see food gluts, particularly tomato gluts. And somewhere this year, in January and the closing part of last year, if you ask a lot of the traders, tomato was readily available on the market and was available very cheap. And so it raises, for one, concerns as to storage facility and post-harvest losses, contributing to why we're meeting just 35% of demand in terms of general supply of tomato to the Ghanaian market. But while we can have conversations about this, this 65% has to be taken care of. And how do we do that? We do that via imports, large imports in excess of some 900,000 metric tons of tomato imports brought into the country each year. And from which regions are we seeking to get these tomato imports into the country? Now, for the rest of the world, we're getting just 25% of that 900,000 metric ton from there. Then the remainder is coming from our northern neighbors, Burkina Faso. And that's where we seek to get a huge chunk of the tomatoes that come into the country each year. And that's what we're making. We were working the math, costing us some 5.7 billion cedis in terms of imports into the country. But in which regions are our traders making the journey into to bring us these tomato products? We're talking about Ouahigouya in Burkina Faso and Titao. And if you know Burkina Faso pretty well, you realize that these two parts, which are not so far apart, about 27 kilometers apart, are in the northern parts of Burkina Faso. In fact, an area which is described as the North region of Burkina Faso. And if you follow the conversation surrounding insurgent attack or terrorist attacks, you realize that in the northern parts of Burkina Faso, a lot of these terrorist attacks are quite rampant. Very, very rampant, as a matter of fact. And they happen along border regions. Now, if you look at the border regions in which these terrorist attacks happen, we share a border with Burkina Faso. We don't get to witness a lot of these attacks within the border regions where we share a border with Burkina Faso, but rather in the northern parts. And yet, our traders have to make this long, perilous journey all the way up into these two regions. And we're focusing on these two regions because this is the region in which the attack happened, where we lost 7 precious lives, 7 precious Ghanaian lives. But they're having to make the journey all the way up into these two regions without any protection whatsoever to get tomatoes readily available for you and I onto the markets. And these are the many challenges which have cost 7+ lives recently in the attack. But we know outside of the lives which were lost as well, there has been 7+ attacks in the last 6 years in terms of the journeying, which brings us to the question, how safe are these traders who are making this journey every now and then into the northern regions of Burkina Faso, where we know there's a lot of terrorist attacks, to bring us tomato supply for you and I to be able to get access to prepare our stew and what have you. Now, we're going to seek to paint an additional picture for you, right? An additional picture for you as to the journey from here in Accra all the way to Titao and Ouahigouya, where our traders are having to journey to be able to bring us these tomato purchases. And so this is the region of Titao where the incident, right? The incident occurred. This is the region of Titao, and they're having to journey from Accra all the way here. And we're going to seek to paint that picture for you right now, where we'll seek to narrow it a bit more for you to get an understanding as to the regions from which they are traveling to all the way into Burkina Faso to get us tomatoes, to have it readily available on the Ghanaian market. What we're seeking to do this afternoon as well is help us understand and ask the pertinent questions in terms of security, amongst many other things, for these traders who go on to the journey to bring us tomatoes onto the Ghanaian market. Just a bit of a challenge in terms of what we're seeking to show for you. But let's engage security analyst and executive director at the West Africa Center for Counter-Extremism, Mutara Mumuni Mukhtar, on what we have as information as to the dangers with regards traveling between Ghana and Burkina Faso to provide these tomatoes. And I'm glad that you could join us this afternoon, Mukhtar. Now, what information do you have about this attack to start off with, and the response not just from Ghanaian officials, but from Burkinabe officials as well?
Well, this is an evolving threat that we're looking at in Burkina Faso and the larger Sahelian region. And the fact that Ghanaians on this occasion have been direct victims of terrorist attacks in Burkina Faso appears to have highlighted the seriousness of the threat to many Ghanaians. But this is an insurgency that has been at play in the last, decade and a half within the region. And if you consider the fact that we've been dealing with this in terms of the context of Burkina Faso has been dealing with the threat in the last 8 years and more, it would be naive for Ghana and Ghanaians who fly routes within Burkina Faso not to have been caught up in a situation like this at some point. Of course, we have seen instances where some Ghanaians have been caught up in situations where Benin have stopped trucks doing their own checks and engaging in attacks. Very often, Ghanaian citizens have been spared this attack. And unfortunately, on this occasion, it hasn't been the case. And this, is the main reason many are now beginning to realize the seriousness of the threat in Burkina Faso. But really, this has been going on for so long.
It's important you make that point, because we've also been establishing that this is not the first in terms of attacks that we've witnessed. There's been a lot of talk about protecting these traders. In here in Ghana, they reached a consensus of some sort with the IGP where there's police protection for them along our routes. But that seems to end when we get out of the jurisdiction. How do we escalate this further? Does this enter into the realms of diplomacy, where we're beginning to ask for special protective detail for our traders when they make their way into Burkina Faso?
If you ask me, from my perspective as a security person, going into Burkina Faso, especially in territories where or similar to Tikao that we are currently talking about, it's a risk too much. It's too big a risk for any trader to fly these routes, either under police or security protection or not. And I think that we ought to have realized this reality and ensure that we are providing security updates to traders and individuals who go in and out of Burkina Faso to ensure that we do not have an eventuality such as this. And I think that, that might be too late, but it's still a good time to ensure that we're putting in place measures that can prevent further, attacks or victims on the side of, the Ghanaian citizens. If you look at the context in northern Ouagadougou, northern Burkina Faso, this is an area that is pervasively under Benin's control. And in fact, on this occasion over the weekend, there have been multiple attacks by Benin on government targets, including civilian targets. And that we needed to have known that this is an area that we do not, get into as traders. And for that to have happened, it's a big, unfortunate situation.
I can understand the concern on your part, but from what we've seen and the data we've had access to, these two regions, the Titao region in particular, and some other parts, the northern part is where they tend to get the best in terms of deals and a lot of the tomatoes as well. And so in conversations as to why they are finding themselves there, they're finding themselves there because these are the regions in which they can get the tomatoes and have them return into the country. In terms of the measures you're asking we put in place, can we go into the specifics on our part and what we can do in terms of diplomacy? Because we've since the coming into office of this president as well, our ties with Burkina Faso have been smoothened to a great extent.
Well, there are many layers involved. First of all, we saw the swift response of the Burkinabe authorities in terms of, response to the situation where several of the genuine attackers were neutralized. And we saw the high-level engagement, diplomatic levels, and security chiefs between the two nations, and seeking to establish the identity and the details surrounding this attack. We need to go beyond that to ensure that we are assessing comprehensively the security situation in Burkina Faso on a real-time basis to be able to advise our citizens, especially traders whose work or job involve going in and out of Burkina Faso.
Right.
If I were in charge, the general prescription at this moment is to advise that no travel or non-essential travel should take place between Ghana and Burkina Faso, especially in those specific areas where the threat is the daily reality. We need to go beyond that and provide security, establish security points where people can call and ask for information and updates on routes that the state supply. Those ways are ways of containing and ensuring that we minimize the risk involved in flying these routes.
Right then, Mukhtar, we appreciate you speaking to us this afternoon. That's Mukhtar Mumuni Mukhtar speaking to us this afternoon on the latest and what we know. But we know as well, Kemini, that there is a genuine concern now based upon this recent attack preventing Ghanaian traders from wanting to make the journey now to Burkina Faso.
Absolutely.
And that could potentially lead to challenges on the market for us in being able to access tomatoes.
Indeed, and that's a natural response to something like this. Now we hear that there could be a shortage of tomato in this country following a decision by tomato traders and transport operators to boycott Burkina Faso over rising security concerns along the trade route. Now, the action comes after reports of 8 Ghanaians being killed, caught up in the recent attack in the country, Burkina Faso, that is. Now, the incident has heightened fear among drivers and traders who rely on the route to import tomatoes into the country. Ibrahim Abubakar is Ashanti region correspondent, where we find many of these traders. He's been engaging with some of them and some drivers as well on this matter. Ibrahim, what else have you picked up from, the drivers, transport owners, and the traders alike?
Well, Kemini, what I can confirm to you is that the boycott has taken effect, because you go to their station, you observe that almost all their trucks have been packed. You also find some of the drivers seated there just making phone calls to their colleagues who are still in Burkina Faso, just to make sure that they are okay. And we do know that as a country for decades, Burkina Faso has been a major source of tomatoes here, especially during the lean season. And in fact, what the traders are even saying is that they don't want to risk going all the way to Burkina Faso to bring tomatoes here, if only farmers here can be able to meet consumption demand.
How are you? It would appear we have lost
Burkina
Ibrahim.
Faso.
Well, Ibrahim, what we're going to do now is take a listen to some of these traders you spoke with. Let's do that now.
You can see the boxes around the trucks are being packed. Within 1 week and above, if we stop going to Burkina to bring tomato, there will be scarcity in tomato in this country. So that is the problem. It's not a fancy that you would travel along. Close to over 500 miles from here to some of the farm gates.
Yehu susunso papa bia se yebekọ ho pa se yekofantos abagana ha pa de enya adwuma emma so kra until say yenya further information bi say ebia empempeso adru no ya me security
now there ya stop ya yenkrofo no sem obia anko until say aban yen papa bekasa ama no hwan ni no yehu de wono nso woka na emanu bia ya so de afa ekire nti yegu so yehwe de be.
Ibrahim, we'll end it here with you, but we'll continue this conversation a bit further with Ranking Member on Parliament's Defence and Interior Committee, Reverend Ntim Fojo, who's here with me in the studio. Reverend, I appreciate your time this afternoon, but this is a very serious matter. The government of the day released a statement when it happened that some people had been caught up in the attacks in Burkina Faso. Since then, we've had the updates, and now the death toll has risen to 8. How does this come to you as a member of the Defence Committee?
Yeah, thank you, Kamini. In fact, it's really a sad incident. It's really troubling to have our compatriots plying their trade, going for goods in Burkina Faso, as they usually do, and having to meet the untimely death killed in a very gory terrorist attack. Condolences to all the bereaved families. Since 72 hours, we got news of this incident. My expectation is that the Ministry for Defense, the Minister for Defense, or responsible for defense, and the Minister for Foreign Affairs should be able to make a trip to Burkina Faso to be able to ascertain the facts beyond the reports that the Minister for Interior has put out. Our expectation is that they ought to pay a visit, a high-level visit, particularly between the Minister for Defense in Ghana and counterparts in Burkina Faso to ascertain the actual circumstances that led to the killing, and further to that, certain concrete arrangements put in place to ensure the safety of Ghanaians who travel to Burkina Faso. We also, the whole country needs to be apprised on what exactly happened and details of how the government is handling it. 72 hours since the incident, apart from the very brief statement that was put out by the Minister for Interior with additional responsibility for national security, we haven't heard from the Minister for Foreign Affairs, we haven't heard from the Minister for Defense. These two ministers are the ministers whose jurisdiction much relates to this incident and ought to be briefing Ghanaians and ought to be engaging the citizens and how the things are unfolding, what happened, and the measures to be put in place to ensure to guarantee the safety of our Ghanaian citizens going forward. So today, this afternoon, the minority is expecting, and this is our urgent expectation, that the joint ministers, Minister responsible for Defense, Minister for Foreign Affairs, and the Minister responsible for National Security should appear in the House as a matter of urgency to brief the House. We have a lot of questions to ask them at plenary in the chamber for them to be able to assure Ghanaians what steps and measures they are taking to ensure that, I mean, these are our neighbors. Burkina Faso are our neighbors. And so it is important that such a major killing that has taken place is not taken lightly. We still have a number of traders who are currently in Burkina Faso, a number of them who may be on their way. What kind of travel advisory have they issued?
I guess those are some of the questions that you'll be asking in Parliament.
Among others.
Among others. I'll hear what the others are. But just to roll it back a bit, we know that at the time that this was announced, the Foreign Affairs Minister was not in the country. Is it your opinion that he should have called off his trip to Ethiopia and dealt with this?
It is most urgent. He has a deputy. The deputy could have gone to accompany to take over the role in Addis Ababa for him to, as a matter of urgency, go to Burkina Faso to ascertain the facts. And we have the minister responsible for defense, acting minister for defense. Any of these two could have, as a matter of urgency, traveled. By now, we're expecting one of them to travel there to ascertain. And that brings us to the concerns we've been raising. There's a major defense leadership failure because we have a lot of intelligence and within the security architecture of this country. It is for a reason that constitutionally, Minister for Defense substantively is expected to be appointed. For 7 months, we haven't had a substantive Minister for Defense. And so for 7 months, there's an acting minister who at the moment is engaged and deeply, engaged in cocoa financing and its challenges and making announcements, slashing, cocoa prices. So he will have very little time to fully provide leadership for the Ministry of Defense to coordinate intelligence between the counterparts in Burkina Faso and those who are here, and to be able to fashion out a coordination mechanism that will ensure the safety of traders that are applying their trade there. The report that was put out indicates that this was a fire exchange engagement between the military of of Burkina Faso and a terrorist group, and then our traders were caught in the middle. There may be more to it. We need high-level presence in Burkina Faso to even apprise the country firsthand how the bodies are being handled and how the victims are being handled, what repatriation arrangements are being put in place, and then lessons from all those circumstances when they are back will guide in putting in place the broader mechanisms that will ensure that any trader traveling out of Ghana will feel safe.
I want us to look at some of those broader mechanisms, because as we speak now, we have a problem on our hands. Some of the traders are already in fear, a natural response to the incident that has happened, and we're expecting. I mean, the prediction then is that we'll have shortage of some of these food items we import into the country. So now let's talk about those mechanisms. What should we put in place when it comes to those trans-border trips for traders?
First of all, the Ministry of Defense would be able to have risk assessment undertaken. If they haven't done that, they must do so.
As ranking on the Defense Committee, you don't have any proposals?
They haven't apprised us as to the risk assessment they've done in Burkina Faso. They haven't submitted any report to us. But if they haven't done so, they must do so. And if that report is available, they ought to be able to advise travelers to Burkina Faso to be able to know the hotspots and the areas where they would recommend no entry, and then recommend the safe areas where traders can go and ply their trade. But even that, there ought to be an additional mechanism, even for designated safe places, for escort to be able to ensure that traders who, as a matter of necessity, ought to be able to go to Burkina for some trading are given that protection. If a politician, a minister, a deputy minister, a CEO travels to Burkina today or even yesterday, they are given a full protection by the relevant security representatives in Burkina on behalf of the state to ensure their safety. So if the politician is protected to travel and return safely, the trader ought to be offered that same protection, cognizant of the situation we are dealing with in the sub-region, and particularly within our neighbors and within our borders. It is so important that the safety of our travelers are held in utmost importance.
But you know, as we speak, you've mentioned a few things. We already know that the Interior Ministry is engaging authorities of Burkina Faso.
Yeah, so that is fundamentally problematic, because
why is that?
The Interior Minister is responsible for internal security. And so if you're looking for the officials whose responsibility it is to ensure external coordination, it is the Minister for Defense.
Well, but locally, we can start dealing with the embassy, with the embassies here.
So the minister,
you agree with that?
No, I agree with you. And I'm saying that the Minister for Interior is not the one who has to lead this conversation. It is wrong at the beginning, at the outset. He is responsible for what happens in this country. He is not responsible for what happens in Burkina Faso. Outside our borders, it is beyond the remit, the constitutional remit of the Minister for Interior. And so the Minister for Defense ought to be speaking. The Minister for Foreign Affairs ought to be working. These two ministers are the relevant ministers who ought to be at the forefront of this crisis management. And yet, those are the people who are conspicuously missing out of this conversation. And so it's most unfair for anyone to even demand further accountability from the Minister for Interior, because he has limited jurisdiction in these matters. And so as a matter of urgency, this afternoon, we're expecting the Minister for Foreign Affairs, the Minister responsible for Defense, to cut off whatever engagement they have elsewhere to appear before Parliament and answer questions that are very important to Ghanaians whose relatives probably have traveled to Burkina and they are not sure of their safety, and whose relatives have lost their lives rather tragically in this incident. We are also using this opportunity to urge the President that his failure to appoint a substantive Minister for Defense for over 7 months now is problematic. And we do not want to wait for further atrocities and further crisis within the leadership of Ministry of Defense to happen before a substantive minister is appointed.
But there's a lot of focus on the Ministry of Defense, but we know that the army itself has its own hierarchy that has been actively working. We know that they have been in the northern part of this country. Why is there a lot of focus on the defense ministry when we have the army that is working already? Or you don't think the army could work without?
So in the security architecture, the chief of defense staff and the service chiefs are responsible for tactical and operational plans. At the policy level and giving the broader policy direction, that is the responsibility of the minister. That is the responsibility of the ministry. And that is why, in addition to having the headquarters of the military, the Ghana Armed Forces, we still have a ministry that is set up to ensure that they provide that policy direction. When you're engaging in high-level external engagement and fostering mechanisms and exchanges and such collaborations with external partners, i.e. Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast, and other external countries, it is the leadership of the ministry that takes the lead. And so when that high-level arrangements are put in place, whatever is agreed upon then is given to the Chief of Defense Staff and the service chiefs to action it with the gentlemen and
this one incident,
and soldiers that we have in the country.
This one incident, albeit very disturbing, is enough to conclude that the finance minister who's had oversight of the defense ministry perhaps is not, having enough time to deal with that sector.
No, but I mean, it goes without saying that finance ministry is the biggest ministry, is the most complex ministry in any country. And so it's improper to want to add on another equally demanding ministry to that ministry for 7 months. Could be for a short term, let's say a month or a few weeks. But for you to put them together for 7 months, it's an indication of how you perceive your security, how security is important to you. Because if security is really important to you, you would want to ensure that you have substantive full complement of your ministers within that sector. And let us not forget that finance ministry is not a security-related ministry, unlike interior ministry that is. And so when you are assigning an additional responsibility for 7 months of defense oversight to Minister of Defense, who is now thinking about budgets, thinking about inflation, thinking about exchange rates, thinking about cocoa financing and how cocoa farmers' failed promises will be fulfilled, it will be most unfair to demand that there will be creditable management of the defense sector, and you are likely to run into major crisis within the security sector governance. We've already had a major crisis with the deaths of about 6 young ladies at Elwak. It was as a result of a leadership failure. And now we have this crisis there. A lot could have been prevented. And so let us put in place... so let us put in place now. Let us not wait further for other calamities to occur.
But what's
let's not downplay.
What's holding?
Let's not downplay.
I absolutely agree with you. What's holding Parliament back from calling the executive to order to ensure that over the last 7 months we would have had a defense minister back?
Nothing has held us back, and we have always demanded. I have always, together with my colleagues in the minority leadership, we've always demanded week on week, even to the extent that it took the attention of the Speaker of Parliament, Right Honourable Alban Sumano Kingsford Bagby himself added his voice and appealed to the President 4 or 5 months ago, as a matter of urgency, to heed to the plea and the calls of Parliament to appoint a substantive minister. The only response we got was, let's go for Christmas, in the words of President Mahama, and then after Christmas, he will think about an appointment. We are 2nd month into the year, and nothing has been done. It's a reckless arrangement which must be cured as soon as possible if the safety of Ghanaians and our defense and the territorial integrities of Ghana is something that is important to the people in leadership.
So this afternoon, you say, they should come to Parliament?
We are demanding that they appear and answer questions.
Thank you very much, Reverend, for talking to us. Reverend Intim Fojo is the ranking on Parliament's Defense and Interior Committee. We've just been talking about the rather sad incident of Ghanaian traders caught up in recent attacks in Burkina Faso. A bit more on the story, because we know co-founder of the Sinan Azugli power plant, Togbi Apede, says from March this year, the company will start the supply of electricity to Burkina Faso. He said the company also aims to expand its renewable energy footprint and collaborate with government for future projects. This was disclosed when the Vice President, Professor Nana Jane Opoku-Agyeman, joined the company to mark its Spring Festival in Accra.
The Vice President, Professor Nana Jane Opoku-Agyeman, joined management and staff of Sonon Asogli Power Limited to commemorate the Chinese New Year. The event, held at the company's power plant, brought together members of the Chinese community in Ghana and industry stakeholders to celebrate the Lunar New Year while reaffirming the long-standing partnership between the two nations. Sonon Asogli Power is said to have contributed 3.2 billion kilowatts per hour to Ghana's grid in 2025, meeting 15% of national consumption. Co-founder Togbe Apede said the company has signed an MOU with new Chinese partners for a petroleum sector project and plans to start supplying power to Burkina Faso by March 2026.
Discussions are ongoing for the construction of a plant in Burkina Faso by Sonon Asogli Power. In response, Asogli Power has acquired 4 sites in the north for the development of solar power projects with an initial target of 200 megawatts.
He said the company is encouraged by the stability of the economy and emphasized the need for government support to grow the energy sector and transition to renewable energy, noting the company is working on various projects, including solar and wind farms, to diversify the country's energy mix. Chairman of Sonon Asogli, Wang Jinyo, commended government for its strategic actions to restore confidence and trust in the energy sector. The Vice President, Professor Nana Jane Opoku-Agyeman, said Ghana is determined to deepen cooperation with China, focusing on transparency, fairness, and development priorities.
Development is not only built by infrastructure, but also by people, cultures, and mutual respect. Today, that history places a responsibility on both sides. Partnerships that endure are built on clarity of purpose, mutual accountability, and the willingness to learn from what has worked and what has not.
You're still here on News Central. When we come back, executive management and senior staff of Cocoa Board announced salary reductions. We'll tell you more about that on the other side of the break.
You're welcome back to News Central. And by the pictures behind me, you know what conversation we're getting into next, because the executive management and senior staff of Cocoa Board, they've announced salary reductions for the remainder of the 2025-2026 crop year, citing liquidity challenges and revenue pressure in the sector. In a statement dated today, Monday, February 16, Cocoa Board announced that the pay cuts take immediate effect and will remain in place for the remainder of the 2025-2026 crop year. Executive management will take a 20% reduction in salaries, while senior staff have accepted a 10% cut. Cocoa Board emphasized that the overarching objective is to reduce overall expenditure and align operational costs with revenue inflows amid liquidity challenges affecting the industry. The cocoa sector remains a critical pillar of Ghana's economy, contributing significantly to export earnings and supporting the livelihoods of hundreds of thousands of farmers nationwide. Let's speak to labor expert, labor consultant Austin Game on this. Mr. Game, I appreciate you speaking to us. What this move by the top leadership send a signal that management is indeed equally worried about the crisis in the sector and willing to pay a price at least for the delay in having paid the cocoa farmers and the relative challenge within the sector?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, this is one of the rare actions taken by management or company in times of difficulties. What they normally would do would be to declare some people redundant. That's what we understand in Ghana here and do very often. This is a very rare step we take, which is very good. And I think it's a step in the right direction.
And how would the decision by the executive management and senior staff to accept salary reductions affect overall labor relations within the organization as well, particularly between management and junior staff who have not been mentioned in this announcement?
Well, normally junior staff are controlled by a collective agreement. And once it's a collective agreement, then obviously they will not be going into it without reference to the national union who controls the collective agreement. But the senior staff and management staff who may not be affected by a collective agreement control may voluntarily, because let's be very real here, their pay normally would be slightly higher than that of the junior staff. Even though the junior staff could also equally be affected by the overall effect of what's happening in the system, they may not be the main issue here. Maybe the senior staff and management staff. That's why they voluntarily agreed to do it.
Right. Now, from a labor economics perspective, what are the likely effects of these salary reductions on employee morale, possible retention, and productivity as well, especially given that the cuts are tied to external market conditions rather than internal performance?
Well, let's be real here. In Ghana, we hardly pay by productivity. We pay because people have appeared at the workplace.
All right.
That's what we do. It's only 1, 2 companies I know that do that. Few, a lot, many, 99%, if you like, they don't. And that's part of the downfall of this nation. So this is an opportunity for them to restructure how they do their things,
right,
and ensure that it helps them much better. But the overall situation Cocoa Board is in is beyond the so-called labor issue. It's a major economic indecision on behalf of the people of Ghana for many years. I think boldly the government is taking steps now to remedy the dirty work that have been done for many years. So I think it's a step in the right direction. If they can hold the horses and make sure they do it well, a solution will be found. I think so.
Right. You mentioned a step in the right direction. Could we see this become a precedent of some sort for future collective bargaining agreements within the wide public sector in Ghana?
It's long overdue. We are not supposed to be paying people for appearing at the workplace. We are supposed to pay people for doing their work that have been assigned to them, and the projected profits have been achieved, and therefore a portion is set aside for disbursement to the working people based on their contribution towards the work. It's about the performance of the business, and the potential that will be developed. I mean, it's about cost. It's about holistic cost of labor. So yes, I think that it's not. We haven't even started anything yet. This is just a drop in the ocean, and I think that government should be bold enough, as discussed at the National Economic Forum, to now come out, because already it's in our labor law that we should not pay people because they have come to work. We should pay people because they have contributed to the growth of the business.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, that's not what we do.
Mr. Game, I want to appreciate you joining us this afternoon as well on the bulletin. Austin Game is a labor consultant speaking to us this afternoon here on the bulletin. It will take us into the regions with Regional Hub.
Member of Parliament for Tamale North and Deputy Minister for Roads and Highways, Alhassan Suhaini, has commissioned a refurbished girls' dormitory at the Northern School of Business after a recent fire outbreak destroyed the facility there. The commissioning and handing over ceremony comes weeks after the fire disaster displaced over 900 students, including final year candidates preparing for their final exams. Speaking at the ceremony, the Tamale North lawmaker described the devastation he witnessed during an inspection visit to the school as a moving sight, noting urgency or urgent intervention is needed. Witnessed the ceremony and joins us with a bit more on it.
By the fire disaster. Indeed, it was such a moving sight to behold when a couple of weeks ago, with my team, we came to inspect the devastation that the building that originally housed a number of students was faced with. I did make a promise to renovate a facility that the school administrators identified as one that could be used as a temporary structure to accommodate especially final year students who needed to prepare for their final year exams. By the grace of God and by the hard work of my team supporting me in the constituency, I am happy that this facility has been refurbished for the use of the students. I want to take this opportunity to congratulate the staff, the headmaster and teachers for their hard work, for their dedication, and for their commitment. I want to commend them for how they continue to prioritize what is important despite these challenges that the school has faced over the years. I think that they deserve a lot of commendation for all that they have been doing for this school. I want to encourage them to continue doing their best and to assure them that we will always work with them as partners to make the future better for our young ones who are here.
Al-Hassan Suhini is Tamale North MP. We can now hear from our correspondent Nadra Mohammed, who covered this event. Nadra, when do we know that the students will have full use of the dormitory?
So, as at yesterday, after the commissioner, they made mention that instantly the students were going to move into the dormitory. But even prior to that, the students, after the fire outbreak, two of the boys' dormitory were temporarily vacated, and then it was assigned to accommodate the displaced students. So already the students had somewhere they were sleeping before the commission of this facility. So they said that after the commissioning and then the handing over, the displaced students will now move into the new facility, and then the boys' dormitory they were previously occupying, the boys will come back and take over their dormitory.
Well, Nadra, we'll leave it here. Thank you so much for talking to us. Nadra Mohammed is our correspondent in the northern region.
Now, amid growing debate over the distribution of development projects in Wa West District, a group concerned youth of the Eastern Corridor of Wa West District in the Upper West region has justified the decision to site a proposed technical and vocational education and training institution in Ga and a 24-hour economy market in Ponyentanga. The group described recent allegations of favoritism, including the Member of Parliament and the District Chief Executive, as misguided and misleading. Correspondent Ibrahim Wangara reports.
Under the scorching sun in Ga, youth leaders, community members, and opinion leaders gathered to set the record straight on what they describe as a distorted narrative surrounding two major development projects earmarked for the Eastern Corridor of Wa West. At the heart of the controversy is the proposed TVET institution to be constructed in Ga. According to the youth, the project is not a sudden political favor, rather a fulfillment of promise made in 2020 by then presidential candidate John Dramani Mahama during a campaign visit to Ponyentanga. According to them, the chiefs and elders of the Eastern Corridor during the visit appealed for the establishment of a second cycle institution to serve the eastern belt of the district, an area that to date has no senior high or technical school. For the youth, the decision to site the school in Ga followed consultations among traditional leaders who selected the community because of its central location within the corridor and the availability of land reserved for the project over the past 5 years. Addressing the media at a press conference, spokesperson for the group, Hafiz Timbile Adam, rejected claims that the Eastern Corridor is being unfairly favored, stressing that their engagement was not to antagonize any group, but to clarify facts and promote unity.
Now that the president has upheld his promise after 5 years, we ask, is it reasonable for anyone to think that this project was meant to go somewhere other than Ga? Would it be fair for anyone to suggest that the project should suddenly be relocated to another community?
And just before we go, Ghana's poultry sector is undergoing revitalization as the German North District Assembly distributes 9,500 birds to 245 residents through government's Nkokon Kitten project. Now, this initiative comes at a time when the country's poultry meal imports reached $373 million, making it one of the top 3 imports with projections of 270,000 metric tons per year.
Launched by President John Dramani Mahama in 2025, the Nkokon Kitten initiative has ambitious plans aiming to distribute 3 million birds to 60,000 households across the nation's 276 constituencies, setting a bold vision for the future of Ghana's poultry industry. During the distribution of the birds to beneficiaries, George Adani, The chief executive of the German North District emphasized his commitment to ensuring the success of the program. He urged beneficiaries to responsibly care for the birds to protect the integrity of this flagship government initiative.
You can see from the background how they are happy and how they are distributing the things for them. I'm very, 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 very happy. Thanks to John Mahama. We received 10,000 birds, and unfortunately, some did not survive. My message is to keep them and protect them. Do everything that is possible for them to survive, because if this exercise failed, meaning and this we failed. So we are particularly about that we've set out all the agric extension officers to go around from here to educate them on how it should be reared.
Member of Parliament for the area, Frederick Yao Ahinkwa, emphasized that the Nkokon Kitinkiti program presents a vital opportunity for residents to improve their livelihoods while contributing positively to the region's agriculture landscape.
Oh, that's our bulletin for you, which came to you from our studios this afternoon. I am Mawina Igbeta.
And I am Kamini Amano. We'll see you same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.